Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Jewish leadership and our community. Our lives post-COVID will never be the same. They'll never go back to the way they once were. So much has changed. Too much has changed. We're not the same people we were a year ago. Our family life, our community life has been transformed. Our very communities have changed. The sobering reality is that COVID has caused tremendous damage to Jewish community institutions. Synagogues may never regain their central roles in our lives. The vitality of Jewish culture and religious centers has dramatically waned and will probably never return to the same apex that they were before COVID. Jews enjoyed going to temples and synagogues, shuls and shtibels, more for the camaraderie and the social scene than for the spiritual spin it added to their lives. They enjoyed seeing and being seen. Social interaction was the #1 reason people attended synagogues. In an informal ad hoc survey I conducted among regular synagogue attendees, next in reasons for attending came prayer, and with a wink and a smile, to hear the rabbi's sermons. People, not just Jewish people, enjoy socializing, with like-minded people. It's what happened at the water coolers at workplaces, and more things that happened like that in terms of socialization. It's what happened after work in restaurants and bars when they were open, and then social distancing never entered into their minds, let alone ruled out their lives. It's what happened after prayers at Kiddush, bar mitzvahs, and bat mitzvahs, annual fundraising galas and dinners. Jews like hanging out with other Jews, and there was no better place to do that than in their places of worship. In my unprofessional poll, I was told again and again how these members of the tribe, as we often call ourselves, enjoyed sharing their lives from the everyday mundane details to the emotional, impactful events with people with whom they shared something else of importance, Judaism. Jews yearn for and thrive on community. It's our sense of community that lends support and connection to something bigger than ourselves. Community gives us a sense of safety and purpose, or it did once upon a time. COVID changed everything. We can pretend, we can do our best to replicate the real experience, but Zooming is not congregating. Shortened versions of our prayer services, limiting our time together as a group, is the antithesis of congregating. Drive-by simchas, festivities, specifically do not allow for congregating. We are no longer congregating, and that's a good thing. It's a smart way to behave. It's the safest way to lead our lives and remain alive. But synagogues and temples are by definition congregations. That is how the Hebrew term for the word synagogue actually translates. Beit Knesset means the place where one congregates. Synagogue is the Greek translation of that term. Those hardest hit by the changes to our traditional synagogue model, changes wrought by COVID, have been the elderly population. The irony of it is that the older age cohorts who now have the time to go to synagogue and attend prayer services without rushing out have no services to attend, no programs in which to participate, no classes to choose from, and no nosh to enjoy. And never underestimate the importance of nosh. They are themselves a community now fractured, a fractured community. They are the community which is at highest risk for COVID. And they are the group of men and women who once made up the backbone of attendees in daily prayer services and communal programs and activities in synagogues. Today, they are the people most loath and fearful of going out to group functions and often least adroit on the computer. They are the least likely to partake in the ersatz communal experience we have integrated into our lives called Zooming. I gave a lecture recently to a senior group of women several afternoons ago, and dozens of women participated. It was inspiring. Many of these women had not seen their grandchildren or great-grandchildren for nearly a year. Some have not left their homes except for doctor's visits. They are rightly afraid of this deadly virus. Their food gets delivered to their door. They are, although physically mobile, technically homebound. The lecture was not on Zoom or on the computer. It was on the telephone. And many of them were listening to me on landlines. I delivered my presentation as if it was in the year 2011, not 2021. It was an old-fashioned conference call. The Jewish community leaders have always struggled to be relevant, to engage and attract followers, participants, parishioners. No one saw COVID coming, and no one would have imagined the changes and the damage that would ensue. COVID has ravished our community. We will survive through creativity, caring. Our religious community and our cultural leaders can help us not only survive, but thrive. They need us, and we need them. I've also been thinking about mentoring and leadership. The Jewish world lost great leaders in the past few days. One of those leaders played a very significant role in my life. His name was Mel Reisfield. He was my mentor. He found me. He chose me. He mentored me. And of that, I am very proud and enormously grateful. Mel was bigger than life. He touched and influenced tens of thousands of people, probably more, even hundreds of thousands. By extension, he was an educator with intuition. His objective was to create personal educational moments, memories for each student. I had the privilege of being Mel Reisfield's protege for 40 years. His reach was enormous. A few years ago, I think it was 2018, I discovered that Mel had struck a marvelous relationship with none other than the JBS founder and CEO, Rabbi Mark Gallo. They were both part of a Friday basketball club, but it was more than guys getting together to shoot hoops. It was a collection of some of the most creative Jewish thinkers and educators in the world. Orthodox, Reform, Conservative, all that mattered was that they were committed to Jewish life and Jewish culture and Jewish education, and that they shared the love of learning and, of course, basketball. Mel Reisfield had a knack for finding people with talent, with great talent, and nurturing it. He did it in Camp Tel Yehuda, in Young Judea, in his Hebrew school. He did it on your course in Jerusalem. Mel was the consummate professional educator. Everything he said, he did, he taught, he had a message. It always came back to Judaism, the Jewish people, Israel, and Zionism. Mel's love of Hebrew was just one example of that. He taught that the messages of the prophets and Judaism compelled us to be good people, not just good Jews. It required us to be both, to change and help make society better and to make our Jewish community better. He was at the forefront of Soviet Jewry and Ethiopian Jewry. He taught us to fight for those causes. He taught us by example. I thought the best way to honor Mel Reisfield would be to read part of an obituary that ran in the Jerusalem Post. It was written by another one of Mel's proteges, Gil Troy. It's entitled, "A Zionist Force of Nature, Educator Mel Reisfield Leaves a Lasting Legacy." Inspirational educator Mel Reisfield leaves a lasting legacy in Israel and the United States, by Gil Troy, January 16th, 2021. It reads, Mel Reisfield, the legendary life-changing Zionist educator-activist who inspired generations of American Jewish youth as their own Zionist Rebbe to understand the centrality of Israel to the Jewish life, passed away last week. His extraordinary impact as a Hebrew school principal by day, Young Judea youth movement leader by night, and Camp Tel Yehuda spark plug during dozens of summers, earned him Hebrew University's Samuel Rothberg Prize for Jewish Education, and the devotion of tens of thousands of his beloved chanichim, proteges. He was 92 and had lived in Jerusalem since 1983. Gil describes the unique environment Mel created at TY. He writes, at camp, Mel and Yafa were Zionist royalty in an alternate universe where ideology reigned. Deep in the 1980s, pop culture admonitions from rock music to blow dryers were banned. To maintain the avirah of the atmosphere, this bizarro world, the cool kids did the hora, not the hustle, while belting out Hebrew songs, except when mooning soulful ballads during Shirash Ketah. Mourning the Sabbath Queen's departure on Saturday night. Without buzzwords like pluralism and diversity, TY and Young Judea carved out a common space for religious and non-religious Jews, left-wing and right-wing Zionists, to do Jewish and love Israel together. Respecting Shabbat and Kashrut laws in public made everyone comfortable. Many experienced these practices for the very first time. Gil concludes, Mel's children, who generously shared him with so many of us, mourn the passing of a beloved father and grandfather. We, his extended family, mourn the loss of this special person, this larger-than-life phenomenon, but we also mourn the symbol of a more insecure era in American Jewry, of a more romanticized Israel, and of an ongoing magic we all can make by caring more about who we once were as a people, who we are today, and what we are capable of becoming. Mel was a powerhouse. He transformed me and shaped me and so many others. I am who I am today because of Mel. My values and my drive to help and work for the Jewish people flourished because of him. I can't speak for all the others, but it seems clear to me that certainly those who were in his world were moved to action and were committed to changing the world and making it a better place. His mantra and favorite song was Arik Einstein's Ani ve'ata nishaneh et ha'olam. You and I will change the world. The world will be a different place without Mel. May his memory be blessed. Yehi zichro baruch.
אני ואתה נשנה את העולם.
Coming up, points of view. As I spoke earlier about the Jewish world took a big hit these past few days, the two columns we're going to look at today are both about the man who shaped and even transformed not only the Jewish world, but the secular world and the greater world as well, Sheldon Adelson. Adelson's imprint on the world was so large and for many so controversial that even his obituaries take on a different form. First up is a column from the Las Vegas Journal-Review, published on January 16th, and it's by Deborah Saunders, one of the Journal-Review's feature writers. She was the Washington bureau chief for a while. It's entitled, Things I Never Told Sheldon Adelson. This is her tribute to Sheldon Adelson. Adelson was one of the largest Jewish philanthropists of recent years. He was an active Republican and a huge lover of Israel. He also owned media companies, including the Las Vegas Journal-Review. He also created Israel Hayom in Israel, which is the largest distributed paper in Israel. Sheldon Adelson and his wife, Dr. Miriam Adelson, known as Dr. Miri, were a force to contend with. They loved Israel and they worked to defend it. Saunders shows just how biased people were about the Adelsons. She begins. The knives were out for me in January 2017 when I arrived in Washington as the White House correspondent for the Review Journal. You see, I worked for what scolds like to call Sheldon Adelson's paper, and that was a no-no. Adelson died Monday night, and I never got the chance to say this. Had he given me marching orders? I heard that question a lot. In fact, I didn't meet or talk to Adelson until 2018 when I introduced myself at an event ahead of the Jerusalem embassy opening. The marching orders question is one I never heard directed at many of the other reporters in the room who work for news organizations owned by billionaires. Jeff Bezos owns the Washington Post. Mike Bloomberg founded Bloomberg News. Rupert Murdoch is the brains behind Fox and the Wall Street Journal. Even still, Adelson was treated as an outlier. The big difference, Sheldon and Dr. Miriam Adelson were out in the open mega donors to President Donald Trump. According to the Center of Responsive Politics, the Adelsons donated some $350 million to Republican campaigns and causes in 2018 and 2020. Saunders argues that the Adelsons were not outliers at all. They were consistent lovers of Israel and they were consistent conservatives. Saunders concludes, the Adelsons also stood outside the mold as Israel hawks who really wanted to move the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. Since 1995, Democrats and Republicans routinely and overwhelmingly voted in favor of the Jerusalem Embassy Act. The Senate voted 90-0 in favor in June of 2017, secure in the belief that no U.S. president would follow through. To the Beltway's surprise, Trump actually kept his campaign promise to do just that. Biden was a yes vote in 1995. During the 2020 campaign, Biden said that if elected, he would not remove the diplomatic headquarters to Tel Aviv. So maybe Sheldon and Miriam Adelson are not outliers at all. I'm certain Dr. Miriam Adelson will continue in the path that she and her husband together forged. Next up is a column by Sean Derns from the Allgemeiner, published on January 13th, 2021. It's entitled, Washington Post obituary on Adelson attacks Israel and defends Hamas. Derns begins by pointing out just how wrong, inaccurate, and biased the Washington Post obit of Sheldon Adelson was. He writes, on January 12, 2021, it was announced that Sheldon Adelson, the American billionaire and philanthropist, had died at the age of 87. The Washington Post wasted no time in attacking him and distorting the truth about Israel. The newspaper's obituary was not only in poor taste, it was poor journalism. Obituary writer Donald Fraser recounts Adelson's support for pro-Israel causes, as well as politicians whom he viewed as being helpful to the Jewish state. Fraser implies that Adelson's support for Donald Trump led to the president renouncing more than 5 decades of U.S. foreign policy that called for a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This occurred when Trump formally recognized Jerusalem, a city that Palestinians, as well as Israelis, claim as their own, as the capital of Israel. Trump also moved the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv, undermining the American role as an ostensibly neutral arbitrator. Dern continues, in May 2018, Adelson and his wife had prime seats at the formal dedication of the new embassy in Jerusalem, less than 50 miles away. Conflict was erupting on the Gaza border, where dozens of Palestinian protesters were killed by Israeli soldiers. His Las Vegas newspaper, the Review-Journal, ran a front-page editorial written by Miriam Adelson with a headline proclaiming, "A great day for Israel and for America." Dern uses the rest of the column to show how off-base the Post and how little they understand Hamas, and how they can't tell the difference between a protest, a riot, and a terror attack. He posits that the Post's agenda is to push a point of view, not cover events. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 2 cartoons today. The first cartoon is an answer to a query that has been asked since 1891. 1891. The question is, which direction does toilet paper go? Family fights have ensued on this question. There have been massive debates. Huge articles have been written. Each side have their own logic and rationale. Should the paper roll out or roll in? This cartoon resolves the question. It actually shows the patent for toilet paper. Patent number 46588, patented December 21st, 1891. The meme reads, the original patent from 1891 for toilet paper roll shows the correct rolling direction, if the case was ever doubted. Next up is a play on the Passover song, Who Knows One, Echad Mi Yodea. It's from Front Lines, and the cartoon is entitled Updating Prayers for 2021. A rabbi is speaking to a student saying, and for Passover we could sing 4 elections, 3 lockdowns, 2 vaccines, and 1 God in heaven and on earth. A great commentary on our very unusual world. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Iran recently conducted a drone exercise. Several hundred drones participated in the exercise. The drones were used in many roles, air-to-air, air-to-surface, surface-to-surface, and some of the drones were fitted with missiles and smart bombs. A major part of the exercise involved hundreds of drones in kamikaze strikes. in which the drones were used as missiles. This kamikaze drone weapon is new and is very effective. Like suicide bombers, the drone can be sent by its operator directly to its target. The videos I watched were like Top Gun drones. This is neither fantasy nor entertainment. The new use of these weapons by Iran is extremely dangerous. Here's another example of the crazy times we live in. This time, it's not a cartoon, it's real. While speaking in Congress, in an appeal to her Republican colleagues, Nancy Pelosi quoted from the great Hebrew poet Ehud Manor and his spectacular poem, Ein li eretz acheret, which in English best translates, I have no other country. Pelosi did not just mention the title of the poem and its essential theme. She gave the attribution. Mr. Speaker, I recall the words of the great Israeli poet Ehud Manor, she said. And then the speaker continued, I can't keep silent in the light of how my country has changed her face. Won't quit trying to remind her. In her ears, I'll sing my cries until she opens her eyes. I can't keep silent of how my country has changed her face.
I recall the words of the great Israeli poet Ehud Manor. And that's what he said when he said, I can't keep silent in light of how my country has changed her face. Won't quit trying to remind her. In her ears, I'll sing my cries until she opens her eyes. I can't keep silent of how my country's changed her face. I urge my Republican colleagues to open their eyes and to finally hold this president accountable.
The poem was turned into a song and made famous by Gali Atari, one of Israel's greatest singers. It is a heart-wrenching and deeply moving poem, and when put to music, it deeply touches the souls of people who care about their country. For Ehud Manor, that country was Israel. For Nancy Pelosi, it was the United States. It's stunning to realize how many examples there are of anti-Semitism on campus. We talk about it pretty often, but it's not often enough. We need to know this. In a tweet, a teaching assistant at Johns Hopkins University polled her followers on Twitter and asked if when grading she should take points away from pro-Israel students. She then described how repulsed she was by pro-Israel sentiment of her students and how she found white men reprehensible. The teaching assistant insisted that up until now, she's always been fair, but her tweets speak for themselves. The university issued a statement, quote, we are aware of an incident of alleged anti-Semitism and potential abuse of authority in the discharge of academic responsibilities on our campus. And while we are constrained in what we can share with you and others about matters such as these, we wish to assure you that we take seriously any and all allegations of discrimination, harassment, or other misconduct, including anti-Semitism. The pressure Jews feel on campus is growing and growing. This is just one of many examples.
Stop the steal! Stop the steal!
We will never give up. We will never concede. And we're going to the Capitol.
Now that Donald Trump will no longer be president of the United States, Israel needs to recalibrate. Israel spent the last 4 years riding the wave of a pro-Israel U.S. policy. It was quite a wave and truly unbelievable. The United States recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moved the United States Embassy to Jerusalem. The United States recognized the Golan Heights as part of Israel. Now Israel must figure out how to navigate their relations with the new U.S. president, Joe Biden, and his administration, of course. Israel, not just Netanyahu, but almost every Israeli leader felt comfortable in the relationship between the Jewish state and Trump. That is gone. Now we're starting from scratch. Biden is no stranger to Israel, but it will not be the same. Saudi Arabia has announced that they are opening an embassy in Qatar. I should say reopening their embassy in Qatar. The announcement was thrown out in a nonchalant comment about opening new Saudi embassies around the world by Saudi Arabia's Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan. The Saudi Foreign Minister was speaking to journalists in Riyadh when he was asked about embassy reopenings. This revelation signals that relations between Qatar and other Sunni countries are on the mend. That's big news because Qatar was isolated from the Sunni countries after they sided with Iran and other Sunni nations and against the other Sunni nations. Now it looks like the divide is narrowing and Qatar is becoming and coming back into the community of Sunni Gulf nations. It's clear that the Trump initiative in the Middle East was successful. Iran was sidelined, and now Qatar wants to come back to the security of the Sunni fold. But many in the Sunni world are still skeptical of their real intentions. Qatar's move to the side of Iran caused serious pain to the Sunni community. But if Saudi Arabia is willing to trust them, other nations will probably follow along. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. We spoke about losing two powerful and important people, Mel Reisfield and Sheldon Adelson. Judaism has valuable traditions to help us remember and memorialize our loved ones. It's really a time of celebration, not mourning. Built into our calendar each year, the anniversary of the death is noted in a special way. For the Ashkenazi world, it's called Yartzeit. Yartzeit is Yiddish. Yar actually means year, Zeit means time. Same as the case in German. We memorialize in a year's time, every year. On the anniversary of the Yartzeit, we say Kaddish. Kaddish means to sanctify. We sanctify the memory. We also give tzedakah. We give charity in memory of those who died. The concept is to build something with the charity, with tzedakah. Tzedakah, we build things. And that is why Jews visit the cemetery and place a rock on the grave. We are building that memory by placing that rock. And we learn in the person's memory. We specifically dedicate time to learn because knowledge continues even longer than stones and buildings, because teaching is handed down from generation to generation. That is how we pay tribute to the memory of those we loved and lost. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.